So friends, in the previous discussion, we have talked about Professor Payal Nagpal particularly made these points with respect to productive labor and education. And she said that for women to come forward to take an active part in social construction, what is needed is the right to vote, the right to frame policies, be a part of the process in which policies are framed for the society as a whole. So in the discussion now, she will make more points with respect to the feminist theory that is enshrined in the text that she is discussing. So,
thank you, Professor Prakash. So we now move to the late 19th century in a sense, and look at some key aspects of the suffragette movement. So the first women's suffrage society was formed in 1865 in Manchester, and it spread to London and other countries from there. We have what is called the National Union of Women's Suffrage Societies that was formed in 1867, and it brought together almost 449 societies, which meant that by now towards the later decades of the 19th century, this awareness that women need to come out and assert themselves had become very strong. And the NUWSS strongly believed in a kind of non-confrontational approach, and they believed that they should do their work peacefully. And we have here the NUWSS poster of the Union of the Women's Suffrage Societies. Now they listed reasons about why women want the vote, and the fact that if they do not have the right to vote, it means that they are not being asked as to what is it they want. And in not being asked what they want, it's almost as if one is treating them in a way that is supposedly inferior. And so the laws ultimately will affect the women, the work that they perform, the children who they are supposed to take care of. So it affects them in every aspect of their life. But their life's experience is something that is kept absolutely out of the purview of people who are lawmakers. So it's the NUWSS also believed that women's participative work, for instance, they were there as seamstresses, dressmakers, and so on. But if they do not have a say in the laws that they make, it is going to affect them. And I quote from it. So, because the vote is the best and most direct way by which the women can get their wishes and wants attended to. So it's the fact that it is the most direct way tells us about not only the fact that it addresses the demands of women, but it is also the most direct way of women's participation. And this directness has with it a certain visibility. It is visible participation, it is visible assertion, and women are deliberately kept out of it so that their presence, in a sense, is not available. So finally in 1889, another organization was formed by Emmeline Pankhurst, and there was a women's franchise league that was formed, and Emmeline Pankhurst then went on to form, because she was not very happy with the ways of the NUWSS, so they went on to form what was called the Women's Social and Political Union in 1903. And Pankhurst and others, they led what they called the civil disobedience movement, and they were considered to be militant women. She also led, along with her co-workers, a lot of hunger strikes, and they were also arrested for it, and Emmeline Pankhurst herself was arrested. And they wanted not only the right to vote, but they also wanted access to professions that were considered to be only for men. Because women were generally, as is pointed out earlier, restricted to jobs that were considered to be supposedly delicate and kind of added, only some kind of aesthetic value to the work that was already being done by the men. So here is, the women's assertion for the vote. Now, This brings us to another very interesting aspect of the suffragette movement, and this is called the Cat and Mouse Act. And this is very, very interesting and something very important for the suffragette movement. The Cat and Mouse Act was actually technically the Prisoners' Temporary Discharge for Ill Health Act of 1913, but it was popularly known as the Cat and Mouse Act. In this, what would happen was that the suffragettes, particularly the group led by Emmeline Pankhurst, now the suffragettes would fall ill due to a hunger strike, and even in prison they would continue the hunger strike. So, on the count of ill health, according to this act, the women could be released from prison. So, but this was to be a temporary release, and this act allowed for them to be re-imprisoned. So, once they would recover, they would be arrested again. So, which is why this was, kind of known as the Cat and Mouse Act. And here's a look at the poster again. So, this leads to, and there were many, many instances, and a lot of it is available about how women were actually forced fed, at times, so that they would not faint and, they would not die. And this was also in terms of the world picture. This was increasingly being noticed by other countries, which is why a lot of these women had to be force fed so that they wouldn't collapse. And one of the things that then happened was to release them and to then kind of rearrest. So, this brings us to another important, pamphlet, one can call it, which is the Freedom of Death speech by Emmeline Pankhurst, and which she delivered at Hartford, Connecticut, on 13th November 1913. And in it, she says, she addresses some of the charges that had been leveled against the women who were considered to be these militant women, and who were kind of asserting themselves with great aggression. So she addresses those charges, and she says that it's been about 8 years since the word militant was first used to describe what we were doing. It was not militant at all, she says, except that it provoked militancy on the part of those who were opposed to it. When women asked questions in political meetings and failed to get answers, they were not doing anything militant. In Great Britain, it is a custom, a time-honoured one, to ask questions of candidates for Parliament and ask questions of members of the government. No man was ever put out of a public meeting for asking a question. So, if we were to look at just these lines that I've just read out, so she addresses this charge of aggression against the women, and she asks, she says, in political meetings, what is the aggression that they have displayed? The only aggression that they have displayed is to ask a question, and they have not got any answers. And she says that in Great Britain it has been a time-honoured custom to actually ask questions in the Parliament and ask questions of members of the government. But how is it that no man was ever put out of a public meeting? And how is it that the women are not only suppressed, but they are also labelled as militant for asserting themselves? So, Pankhurst's speech is very important, because we're looking at it as an intervention made in 1913, and women with a certain amount of property were allowed the vote around 1920, and of course finally everybody gets the right to vote in 1928. So no man, she says, was ever put out of a meeting. She then says that, the first people who were put out of a political meeting for asking questions were women. They were brutally ill-used. They found themselves in jail before 24 hours had expired. So, this is an aspect of history that's often ignored. The fact that women had to assert themselves and they really had to struggle. The struggle was not simply writing. The struggle was to take to the streets, to carry banners, to write pamphlets, to give speeches. And this is what the women did to finally win the vote. They won the vote. So, I'd request Professor Prakash to share his views on, a speaker like Pankhurst.
It has been a very subtle question, and a subtle way of controlling women. That first you don't give them a right, and when they assert their right, and how do they assert their right? They get together, they release pamphlets, they discuss, and they ask questions, the most important thing. So if a question is asked, it's a democratic right of everybody, and in parliamentary discussions, the only thing that is important is asking questions. So women say we also want to ask questions.
Yes.
We also have a certain point of view, and we want to extend it to the larger population, particularly consisting of women, and let all of them then respond accordingly. So this is a very simple kind of a right. But just see the way male prejudices operate in society, where if a woman asks a question, then she is asked to shut up. And if she doesn't shut up, then she is put into jail. So who is militant? The militant is the male-dominated law. So this is the argument that Pankhurst is extending,
Yes.
and it makes a great deal of sense that if you peacefully ask a question, and a question of course works against the interests of the males, then they have to answer, and they have to withdraw their privileges and become equal with women. So this is very important, and I particularly notice the urgency on the part of women to come to the street,
Yes.
to be together, to let their views be known to people. And if that is militancy, then I think it's quite good that women come forward and ask for the right to vote and ask for the right to disagree. So disagreeing, asking questions is a right that men always exercise, and there's nothing wrong in women also asking, even if inconvenient questions. Because if the inconvenience is actually an expression on their part, they feel inconvenient in society. So this is a very good point, and I wish that the feminist movement of the 20th century would have taken up such issues much
Yes.
more broadly. That we will discuss when we come to that. But this is a point worth noting, and reconsidering our own prejudices in society.
Yes.
I agree.
And in fact, she goes on to explain how they did kind of do many things, and she enumerates some of them. But she says that it all starts with how they are deprived of the right to ask questions. And if they have been aggressive on any count, it has been a result of this, because they are then taken and put into jails, and then while in prison, what follows is the cat and mouse act. So if you go on hunger strike over there, then you are to be released, and then again, the moment you regain your strength, you are put behind bars yet again.
You qualify again to be arrested.
You qualify again to be arrested. Absolutely. So the history of humanity is based, she says, on ignoring the rights and grievances of people who don't have power. And it's a very important phrase that she's saying. She's calling it the history of humanity. It's based on ignoring the rights and the grievances of people who do not have any power. In a sense, Emmeline Pankhurst is also kind of, urging us to think about things from the point of view of people who do not have rights and who are, in a sense, disempowered. So we need to kind of, if we are to empower ourselves, then we have to reorient our understanding of history from the point of view of people who don't have that power. So among some of the things that these women did, they prevented the stockbrokers, and this was very interesting, they prevented the stockbrokers in London from communicating with those in Glasgow. So there was no telegraphic communication for a day, and of course that affected the stock market. And this is an interesting point, because it also shows how they were also operating in a very intelligent manner, and they were talking about kind of preventing not just a patriarchal society from operating, but also a very strongly capitalistic society from operating when they stopped the telegraphic communication. So she says that when you talk about women are not restricted to either the upper or the lower class. The women cut across class. They express the demands, and they want assertion for women from all classes. And she's also extremely critical of patriarchal methods of controlling women, going back to Harriet Taylor Mill and forced subordination. So the fact that the laws as they existed could not control the women. So archaic laws, almost she says, going back to like the Middle Ages, are brought, and women are forced to kind of in a very feudal sort of manner, they are being forced to accept the law of the land. So, and which is why the Cat and Mouse Act, she says, was passed, so that women could be controlled in a certain way. Now, I again quote from the Freedom of Death speech by Pankhurst, and she says, "It has come to a battle between the women and the government as to who shall yield first, whether they will yield and give us the vote, or whether we will give up the agitation." And it is a tussle now with the way the government was operating, in the day. She says there are women lying at death's door, and this is important because, as I said, that this is often ignored, and one considers the first wave of feminism to be just women's struggle to win the right to vote, and it's probably dismissed in a few lines. But it's important to actually look at what has formed the basis of the writings of women like Taylor Mill, and speeches by the suffragettes. Apart from Emmeline Pankhurst, there are many others whose speeches are easily available now. So this tells us about the real nature, and this struggle is totally political. This is assertive, and it is a totally political struggle, and in that sense, this is, I think, the first instance. The reason why this is also referred to as the first wave is this is, in that sense, the first instance in history where women are coming together and asserting themselves as a huge collective, not just a collective but a huge collective. So she talks about, Pankhurst draws attention to women's struggle when she says that there are women lying at death's door, recovering enough strength to undergo operations, who have not given in, and who will be prepared as soon as they get up from their sick beds to go on as before. There are women who are being carried from their sick beds and meetings. So now I want to say to you, she says, who think women cannot succeed, we have brought the government of England to this position that it has to face this alternative. Either women are to be killed, or women have to be given the right to vote. So this, I think, is it's like a do or die situation for them, and this do or die situation is not simply just to be allowed to vote, but it is their complete participation. It is completely redefining the role that has been given to the women, and in this sense, I think we still have a lot to learn from the suffragettes and the first wave feminists, because post the 1960s and 70s, feminism has also, as much as it has branched out into feminisms, there is also an inward turning that it has taken, and one wonders if it has taken women away from participative politics into areas that are probably more academic and less social and less participative in that sense. So again, here I'd like to ask Professor Prakash what he thinks of this.
Actually, this academic part we'll definitely discuss when we come to 20th century feminist texts, theory texts. But the basis for that, is there in your lecture, where you compel attention to go into the making of militancy. Militancy is actually made by the male oppression, and male oppression is not merely of the physical kind; it's also the mental, ideological kind. You ignore them, you just sleep over whatever women say. You don't respond to them at all, and when they come forward and they shout, even then you say you are wrong and you have no right to this. So in fact, what I say is that legal right also is earned through some kind of collective action, and collective action peacefully done forces the supremacist classes to become violent. And if they are calling the other section violent by suppressing them, then I think the irony is not lost. So that is what is important here. The theoretical point is that one has to go into the very depths of what militancy is, what aggression is. Aggression is there in the prejudices of the system, of the political system, of the ideological things that males generally are influenced by. And if women come forward and they argue out this case by saying that you are imprisoning us and then you are leaving us out because we have lost this sense of health and we become ill, and the moment we recover we will put again into jail. Now this is militancy. Militancy is not that they persist for their rights.
Yeah.
The militancy is that they are stopped from enjoying equality among in society with the males. So this is how theoretically one can present it.
And a lot of arguments that were used against the suffragists. The arguments like how the women should operate. The sphere of operation of the men and the women are totally different. There were, by the way, anti-suffrage societies that were formed, and there were anti-suffrage posters also. There were documents being circulated by the anti-suffragists, and they said that the women's influence, the women are in that sense supposed to be noble, and so they have to influence the society in a certain way that is not the way in which the men operate. And so their role in a sense in reform can be actually achieved by other ways, such as by reform in the society and so on, and of course the fact that women have no political experience and so on and so forth. So these kind of arguments were being used against the suffragettes, but they did not pay heed to anything, and the women came together as a collective. And like Harriet Taylor Mill, who had invoked the American example, Emmeline Pankhurst also mentions the Americans, and especially the man to ask whether the women should get the vote or no. That when you talk about genuine equality of human rights, then how is it that the women are left out of this? So in 1918, the act was amended, and a woman could vote if she was 30 years of age, and she had a certain amount of property. And so in 1920, Lady Astor, she says that we have the vote and we plan to use it. So this finally leads to universal suffrage in a sense for women, all women, in 1928. But as a first wave of feminism, I think the documents, the feminist documents, speeches, pamphlets of the 19th century and the early 20th century make us, understand English history in a very different way, and the struggles of the feminist struggles that are a part of the feminist movement in a more holistic way, in a more rounded way, where we understand that the right to vote is tied integrally to the right to participation in civil life, in social life, in political life, in access to professional spheres, in access to spheres that will allow the women to engage, in a sense, in productive labor. So Emmeline Pankhurst again is a very, very important voice.
How do you sum up the discussion in the case of these two thinkers that you have presented?
I think, and I also try to draw the connections between Harriet Taylor Mill, for instance, who's writing in 1850s, and Pankhurst, who's giving her speech in 1913. Both interestingly, and this is something that I think I noticed earlier also, that a lot of the women who are writing in the 19th century onwards, they're all referring to the Americans as an example, and Pankhurst too is kind of invoking this question by asking that in America you believe in genuine equality, so what do you really think, that should women get the right to vote or no? So
is it because in America the discussion was also at the level of war being fought. There was a civil war going on in the 19th century, and that would have given some kind of encouragement to women to come forward and to discuss political issues. So maybe that was the spirit that worked behind the American awareness, which was, as you say, superior to the consciousness of Europe at that time.
Absolutely, and I think the entire the Charter of the Declaration of Independence itself, and equality for all, and how there's a sense, I think, in women in England that in America the fight is there, but women are able to kind of come out in the open, get together and assert themselves more probably, unlike England where you have the Cat and Mouse Act and so on. So it kind of makes the whole thing, this shift actually, where they're struggling with their own context in England, but at the same time they're looking sideways also at America, and which also tells us how the women of England are also looking towards the women in America, and looking at how they can evolve together. And how the feminist movement in this sense, really speaking, becomes a movement when these women also bring the American women into the picture.
Would you say that this kind of consciousness that emerged in America and also then went to Europe, this is a kind of internationalizing the thought of women, and women when they become aware, then some kind of bells start ringing for the rest of the people?
I agree, because today, I think 70s onwards, when we've been talking about feminisms, I think the root of it can really speaking be traced here to mid 19th century, where whether it is the institution of marriage and women seeking divorce, they're continually looking at laws and in America, and the way laws are being framed in America, and that is also something they never stop looking there. So I think that there is a kind of a sense of sisterhood that is being evolved, I think, in their reference to women over there. But I think what's important here is also, in terms of summing up this lecture, is to I think really genuinely interrogate the first wave of feminism and the suffragette movement through these women activists and their work, and also to kind of see how they link, we talked about modernity, and that is genuine modernity, when in 1850 Harriet Taylor Mill is really speaking, talking about the need for women to participate. And I've been, I think, continually asserting that it's not only about the right to vote, but it's also about right to professional spaces. And women seem to have understood that if they are going to limit themselves to a role in the house, in the home, just as a homemaker, then that is going to limit them, and they need to step out of it.
Say a word about lessons of the suffragette movement. Any lesson that we have learned?
I think there's a huge lesson to learn from the suffragette movement, and that is women's participation and the understanding of participatory politics, the understanding of women's participation in asserting themselves not only through the vote but also through the professional sphere, through their participation in social and civil and legal and political life.
Friends, we come to the end of the discussion with the summing up that Professor Payal Nagpal has done of the discussion, and we see that the suffragette movement was a strong expression of the assertion of women in the early part of the 20th century and the latter half of the 19th century, and it is because of this that in academics, in social life, in ideology, women started participating in a big way in the time to come. So with that we come to the end, and thank you Professor Payal Nagpal, and viewers, you must go into these questions at your own level and see the answers for yourself. Thank you.